If you are a first-time parent in the house, I don't know if you can rewind the clock some, or maybe you are in that phase right now. I know we have a lot of young families in that phase, but there's a lot of things that happen. And for us, whenever we had our daughter Ellie, I have a 6-year-old Ellie and a 3-year-old Ezra. Ezra is huge. He's like literally growing like a weed. If he's not in the NFL, we've done something wrong. It's just nuts. And Ellie is a precious little angel. But I remember going back to the time whenever Cody told me that she was pregnant, my wife Cody. That can be confusing if you don't know me. Say it, sounds a little bit weird. Looks a lot better in person. And my wife Cody and I, we were living at this time, it was the season we were planting Wake. So this is rewind the clock to 2016. We had basically packed up our apartment and we knew that God was calling us to plant a church. We didn't know what that was gonna look like. And so we ended up moving in with my in-laws, Hugh and Debbie. And I don't know if you are part of the family unit that has in-laws, but it doesn't sound great whenever you first get married and you're like, hey, I think we're gonna plant a church. By the way, I don't have a job. Can I move in with you? Like, it doesn't go over too well. But that was the context of our life at that particular time. I quit my job and literally no money coming in. We're living upstairs in a small bathroom and small bedroom. And Cody calls me into the bathroom upstairs and she's crying. And I'm like, oh, this isn't good. And I walk into the bathroom and she's holding a pregnancy test. I'm like, oh, this is not good. And she's like, I'm pregnant. And her first words, she was like, what are we gonna do? And I was like, babe, I got this. Like every male is like, I got it. Just calm down. There's no need to panic. Internally, my dialogue is like, what are we going to do? I got no money. I'm living with the in-laws. We don't even have room for this baby. Where are we gonna put the baby? In the staircase? Like, I don't know the first thing about this. And at the time I guess I was 2016, 26. And we were terrified. And there's a moment when you hear the words that you're pregnant, and then it proceeds with a bunch of doctor's visits. You go to the doctor, and they tell you how your baby's doing. They check in on the heartbeat, and they constantly are telling you things about the baby. In reality, you're just sitting there, you're listening to the heartbeat, and you don't hear anything that the doctors tell you. You have no idea what they're telling you. And they're like, your baby's growing. They always accompany it with fruit. I don't understand why, but it's like, it's a grapefruit, it's a cantaloupe, it's a watermelon. I don't get it. But that's how the baby grows. And eventually you begin to see the baby and the mommy tummy comes out and you're like, this is really great. But then there's a moment whenever you get to the hospital and what you had been hearing about for the past 9 months becomes the reality. Yeah. And you hold this life in your hands and you see for the first time the life that you had been hearing about for the past 9 months, and it changes everything. You hold this baby, and all of a sudden, the selfishness that you have, you quickly realize is going to die. All of your conveniences are out the door. Your sleep cycle is about to be ruined. And a nurse is about to come into the room and tell you, all right, you're ready to go home. And you're looking to her like, don't send me home with this thing. Is there a manual? It's like, is there something? I don't know what to do. But everything changes in that moment. You had first heard about it, and then you saw it with your eyes. And when you saw it with your eyes, it changed everything about your life. I tell you that this morning because this is what Jesus does in the parables. If you're new to church and you're wondering what in the world a parable is simply a story that Jesus tells. It's a fictional story that he uses to communicate a truth. However, Jesus does not make that truth clear or concise. He doesn't tell a parable and then say, this is the point. However, in Matthew chapter 13, he gives us one glimpse into the insight of a parable that we're gonna look at here in a few moments. And what Jesus does with parables is he draws in the curiosity of the audience and he says, listen to this story. He says, if you have ears to hear, then listen. And then eventually, as it hits your ears, the hope is that you would begin to see the reality of the man telling you the story. That this man is not just some man who came to earth, but this man is, in fact, the Son of God, the Messiah who came to save the world. And eventually, if you see that beautiful sight, it will transform your life entirely. And so let me set the scene for us. I'm going to read a portion of scripture that helps us understand parables and the context of parables, and then we'll get into the meat of our text in just a few moments. But let me set up the scene in Matthew chapter 13, because we're jumping into the story, and if we rewind the scene, we understand that Jesus at this point in his ministry has been accumulating a lot of crowds. He's beginning to have a lot of clout in the area, and crowds are coming to see Jesus teach. And it's interesting because in the crowd, you not only have people who are skeptics who would come to hear Jesus teach, people who doubted if this King Jesus really was who he says that he was. They wanted to see what he was about, hear his teachings. If you're a skeptic in the house this morning, then I invite you with the same invitation that Jesus gives to you, which is come and see. If you're wrestling with your faith this morning and you're skeptical about Christ and you're skeptical about the things of God, then he would just simply invite you to say, come and see. Then in the crowd would be schemers. These were people who really honestly wanted Jesus dead, and so they were scheming plans, trying to figure out how they can crucify this man. They're skeptics and schemers. And then the ones that I would say were there for the show. They showed up for the show. These are the people who said, we want what Jesus has for us, but we don't really want Jesus. In other words, Jesus, you fed a bunch of people with bread and fish. We want in on that. Jesus, you were like the first Chick-fil-A drive-through. We want more of that. They just showed up to get something from Jesus. I think the same is true for us today, that oftentimes we can wander in through the doors of the church wanting something from Jesus, but not actually wanting Jesus himself. We want him to fix our finances, but we actually don't want to follow him fully. We want him to fix our marriage like another guru, but not actually truly follow him with our whole hearts. And then lastly, there were the steady disciples who, though they didn't fully understand what Jesus was talking about, and though they had question marks, they still showed up. And this is what Jesus tells his disciples as they question Jesus with the particular parable that he had just told. In this moment, Jesus sets himself into a boat and he pushes back and he begins to speak to a crowd of people and he creates his own amphitheater. It's a really cool scene. And you would think that the words that would come out of Jesus' mouth would be some profound moral thing that would say, this is how you fix your life. Instead, the words that come out of Jesus' mouth are not that. They're not clear and concise. In fact, they're convoluted and confusing to the audience as Jesus begins to speak out, talking about a sower and a farmer and seed. He's like, this makes no sense. And this is what the disciples begin to ask him, and this is Jesus' response. Starting in Matthew chapter 13, verse 10 through 16. He says, then the disciples came and said to him, why do you speak to them in parables? Talking about the audience. And he answered them, to you it has been given to know the secrets of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it has not been given. I want to just pause there for a moment. The stories of Jesus, the parables of Jesus, orbit around the kingdom of heaven. If you're asking what the point of the parables were, they were always pointing to the kingdom of heaven. Jesus saying that I am in fact here. In Matthew chapter 4, he says, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. This was Jesus saying, hey, listen up. I'm here. The kingdom of heaven has come to you. And for us, we live in the tension of already but not yet. Jesus has come in the incarnation, yet we are still longing for his return. But the kingdom of heaven has come, is what he's saying. Verse 12, for to the ones who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away. You see the complexity of Jesus' conversation here? Sounds like a fortune cookie. You're like, Jesus, what are you saying? He says, this is why I speak to them in parables, because seeing, catch this, they do not see. And hearing, they do not hear, nor do they understand. Let me just pause here. This is exactly the culture that is set up for us in churches across America today. That just because you come to see Jesus and try to find him and hear him, there is a type of distraction, there is a type of lack of submission to the King of Kings and Lord of Lords that will cause you not to hear and not to see him as the true King. This is what causes crowds. You understand me? That want to show up for the show, but not Christians who want to devote their lives to him. If you want to be a devoted follower, you have to see Jesus for who he is. He says, this is why I speak to them in parables. In verse 14, he says, indeed, in their case, the prophecy of Isaiah is fulfilled that says, you will indeed hear, but never understand. And you will indeed see, but never perceive. For this people's hearts have grown dull. And with their ears they can barely hear, and their eyes they have closed. Please don't let that be our generation. Please don't let that be our generation. He continues, lest they should see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn. He says, if you did hear and if you did see, if you would turn to me, then I could heal them. But blessed are your eyes, talking to the disciples, for they see, and your ears, for they hear. The invitation to you and I this morning, the invitation to us is this. Do you have ears to hear? Not just another message that you just showed up for so that you can check this off your list. But do you have ears to hear this morning the truth of the gospel? Are your ears willing to receive what God has for you? Or are you in a posture that says, man, I'm a skeptic, I've been burned, I don't know about this church thing? Listen, do you have ears to hear? Because Jesus invites you into it. So listen this morning. Can you imagine, though, for us as human beings, active listening is one of the most difficult things that we do. And we don't do it very well. If you want facts, just ask your wife how well you're listening. Husbands. She's like, you ain't listening at all. Active listening is one of the hardest things we do. A couple of the different reasons why. First and foremost, distraction. Listen, our attention span is less than a goldfish right now, y'all. That's not like me just throwing out some insult. That is a reality of our generation. Less than a goldfish. I don't even understand how this is still a thing. I'm being really honest, y'all. It's like preachers and comedians. The only time that people show up in a crowd format to listen to somebody orally give a speech. In our generation, with as much distraction as we have, it is difficult to hear. Because right now, even in this setting, your phone might be vibrating, you might be getting a notification, you might be trying to set up a reservation right now at whatever restaurant you're thinking about that you want to go eat. You might be thinking about your kiddos. You might be thinking about a conversation that you had on the way to church. You might be thinking about your stresses. I don't know what you're thinking about, but I know looking out here that y'all are all thinking about something. And half the time it ain't what I'm preaching. Because of distraction. Distraction. It's hard for us to hear. And then secondly, it's the internal dialogue. Like, if you could get past your distractions, then it is the communication. Like, you hear words coming out of my mouth, but you are filling in the blank of what that means to you with your internal monologue. As I'm speaking, you're trying to process it. And then thirdly is just dogmatic viewpoints. Like, some of you can get hung up on a theological slant because maybe I said something wrong or somebody said something wrong and it threw off the entire message for you because you're trying to Figure out that whole thing in your head right now. Or it could be that you're so dogmatic in your approach that you're like, I've heard this parable before, so I'm just gonna tune out and I don't really need this message. Active listening is so difficult, and Jesus is speaking to a Jewish audience who has been oppressed, and they're longing for a leader to rise up, and he's created an amphitheater where there's no screens. There's no Uber, there's no reserve a table, there's no restaurants. There is nothing to distract them with, and Jesus is leaning into them and saying, do you hear? Can you imagine how difficult it is for us now to hear what Jesus is trying to speak to our hearts with all of the distractions, with all of the information, with all of the internal monologues? My invitation this morning with the parables of Jesus, do you have ears to hear? Calm the distractions, calm the dialogue, and open up your mind to hear what God has for you this morning. Amen. So, with that being said, let's listen to this parable that Jesus says in Matthew chapter 13, verses 44 and 46. He says, the kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of pearls who, on finding one pearl of great value, went and sold all that he had and bought it. Do you have ears to hear this morning? Yes. Do you hear what Christ is saying? So let's look at this. Very first thing, first and foremost, in the time that we have remaining, 3 quick things. Sight. Number 1. If you're taking notes, write this down. Sight. You see the text? The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. It's interesting because both of these parables go hand in hand. One man was stumbling upon a treasure that he found. The other man was a merchant searching for something. In both cases, whether you stumbled in here this morning or you were searching for Jesus, Jesus can show up in a moment just like this if your ears are open to hear and if your eyes are willing to see. And in this parable, this man sees something and he covers it back up, but he sees the surpassing value of Christ. That's the question that you and I first need to ask ourselves is, do you have sight this morning? Do you see Christ and his surpassing worth? Listen, if you poll every guy in the house who's married, and you go back to the dating stage, y'all. Let's go back to the dating stage, all right? Actually, pre-dating. I messed this up in the 9 a.m. I won't mess it up in the 11. Go back to the pre-dating. There was a moment in that dude's life where he saw whoever the chick was, and it was like the heavens opened, and there was birds singing, and there was a radiant beam of light that came from heaven upon whoever he was looking at, and he's like, her. For me, that happened whenever Cody and I, we were not dating, we were friends, and we were on a trip, and she came out of the room with her friend, and I don't quite understand it, but she came out in these white framed glasses. And for the first time, I like did that double, like my neck broke a little bit. I did that double take, and I was like, uh-oh. I was like, I'm feeling things in my heart right now. You're my friend, but you're looking really good right now, girl. So like, can he talk like that? I just did. And I saw her for the first time. My eyes were open to the beauty of her. And you can ask guys, I guarantee you can pull it. And guys, if you don't have a moment, you better make up one real quick. Otherwise, lunch conversation is gonna go south. If you need marriage counseling, email Efrain at wakechurch.com. And I saw her for the first time, and my eyes were open, and it was a moment that changed the trajectory of my life, because from that moment on, I set my sights on her. And it changed how I how I approached her. It changed me spending money because I'm like, I'm gonna spend money on this girl. If this is gonna happen. It changed my time, my energy, my effort. All of my aim and all of my focus was on her. If you go back to that moment, now a miracle had to happen in the relationship because clearly she did not see me like that. And it took a couple of years, but God opened up her eyes miraculously, and she saw me finally in all my glory, right? And the rest is history. But that moment has to happen for us with Christ. Some of you have come to church for 20 years, and you've been playing games with God, and you actually don't see Christ as valuable. You see Christ as an accommodation to your dreams. But the moment that Christ is valuable means that your eyes are opened up to a spiritual reality, that you see the surpassing worth of who he is. And when you see that surpassing worth, it changes everything in your life. The way you spend money, the time, your energy, your resources, all are pointed. Your sights are set on Christ. And if your sights are not set on Christ, and if your time and your energy and your effort do not reveal that, then my question to you this morning is, do you even see him as valuable at all? He found a treasure in the field. The merchant found a pearl so valuable that he was willing to sell it all so that he can have the one. See, spiritual blindness happens to us, and we have to get to a point where we're praying to God that our eyes would be open to the beautiful realities of who Christ is. Because spiritual blindness at the end of the day, please don't miss this, is seeing treasure and not realizing it's treasure. Seeing Christ, oh yeah, I come to church. I raise my hand a little bit. I think I do my thing. I pay my dues like a country club. You see Jesus, but you don't see Jesus. You've played games with Jesus, but he has not been your all in all. Here's the question that you have to ask yourself, and I've asked it many times here at Wake before, but is Christ preeminent or is he significant in your life? Is he preeminent or is he significant? Preeminence means that he is in first place. The Bible tells us, Colossians tells us that he is the preeminent one before all things are held together by him. The question is do you realize that he is preeminent? Because if you realize it, then your life will orbit around Christ. But if he's simply significant, don't miss this, your life orbits around your desires, your dreams, your wants, and Christ, well, he just comes along for the ride. If he's preeminent, it changes everything about your life. It changes the trajectory of your life. But if he's just simply significant, then you're okay with just showing up on Easter and Christmas. If he's just significant, then we're okay with other priorities taking priority over Christ. But if he is preeminent, then everything revolves around him. Our life is submitted to the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Do you have ears to hear, church? And do you have the sight to see that Christ is, in fact, the most valuable person? Secondly, sight will then lead to satisfaction. Look at the text. A man found, he says, like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. And then what? Then in my favorite word in the Bible, if you've been with us at all, you know I love to preach about this. Then in his what, church, class? In his joy. In his joy, he goes and does what? He sells everything that he has and he purchases the field. The merchant, the same thing. He sells everything that he has and he purchases the pearl. In his joy. Not, please hear me, not out of duty. Not out of,
Not out of duty. You can't.
Siri. Man, always trying to have a moment, Siri. Not out of duty. Listen, some of you have come to church and you just come to church kicking and screaming. You don't enjoy it. Some of the husbands in the house right now, you're here because your wife drug you to church. Does that sound like in his joy? Students, this isn't something to endure. Because y'all give it up for the students, man. They're leading us in worship. Some of you are like, I don't even know what to do with the students at the front of the altar. I'm like, keep on coming. Keep on coming. But this isn't something to endure just to get past high school. This isn't something that we just endure. Church and community isn't something that we just endure. It is something that we get to enjoy. It is the joy of the Lord that becomes our strength. But in order for it to be joyful, this is the problem. In order for it to be joyful, your eyes have to be opened to see the surpassing worth of Christ. If you don't see the surpassing worth of Christ, then I'm here to tell you that you'll continue to be drugged to church. You'll continue to come with an attitude that's like, I don't know if I really want to be here. You'll continue to have fights in your marriage, like, I don't really need to go do that church thing anymore. You'll continue to come in through the doors with your arms crossed, like, this ain't anything for you. But if you see the value of Christ, you will come in here joyful. You will come in here ready to praise God with all that you have because you see the surpassing worth of Christ. Yeah. Listen, I don't know about you, but I want to be a part of a community that is full of joy. I want to be around people that are joyful, hanging out with one another, loving one another, having friendships, seeing discipleship form. Like, that's what I want to be a part of. Joy, in his joy, and it becomes his strength. It is the satisfaction that is there. But you have to see Christ as the surpassing worth. Listen, parents in the house, again, I don't know why I'm full of parent analogies. I'm sorry, guys, but I am today. Listen, I don't know if you've ever spent time purchasing a gift for your kids that they wanted. Like, it was probably like a ridiculous toy that they just begged for. And you're like, it's Christmas. Let me see if I can make this happen. And you spend all of your time and energy getting this one particular toy. Maybe it went out, out of stock, and you had to wait in line for something. I don't know. Nobody waits in line anymore. It's Amazon Prime. You're like, Amazon Prime, baby. Regardless, you get a gift for your kid, and you put the gift under the Christmas tree, and you are awaiting that moment on Christmas Day for them to open up that present. And you get to the moment, and they rip into the wrapping paper, and they rip into the box, and they pick up the present, and they're like, this is awesome. And for a moment, you see joy fill their face. And that was why you sacrificed all that time, for that one fleeting moment. But then something happens that is infuriating. They take the toy, especially if you have kids that are like 6 and under, and they set the toy aside, and they pick up the wrapping paper in the box that costs you nothing. And they proceed to play with it, and their imagination runs, and they're playing with the box, and it's incredible. But you're thinking to yourself, what about the toy? What about the gift? And they play with the box. The same is true with the sacrifice and the gift of salvation that Christ has purchased for us. That we receive it, and there's a little bit of joy. And then the next thing we do is we turn to the box that is completely worthless. We turn to culture. We turn to things that have no value whatsoever, that cannot and will not ever satisfy your heart. C.S. Lewis says it this way, one of my favorite quotes. He says, we are half-hearted creatures. Listen to this. Fooling about with drink and sex and ambition, when infinite joy is offered to us. like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in the slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday by the sea. We are far too easily pleased. When you see that Christ is worth all, and your eyes have been opened to it, he will satisfy your soul in ways that you cannot even comprehend. But you have to give him a chance to satisfy your soul. We want Christ to do it, but we're busy playing with the box. We want Christ to heal our hearts, but we're too distracted by all of the things around us that have no value whatsoever because we are far too easily pleased. When you see him, when you have the sight and spiritual eyes to see Christ, and then you're satisfied in Christ, it'll lead you to the third thing, which is sacrifice. See what the text says. A man found it, he uncovered it, then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. The sacrifice is joy-filled. The sacrifice is, I have found something that is far valuable. Here's a question you should ask yourself. Fill in the blank. This is an exercise. This is when you get to use your internal dialogue. You ready? I would be happy if. Fill in the blank. I would be happy if what? If your bank account hit a certain number? If you finally found that one person that you've been looking for? I'd be happy if my marriage was better. I'd be happy if I had a different house. I'd be happy if I had better kids, or I'd be happy if my kids would just listen to me for once. What is it? What did you just populate in your mind? Because whatever you put in that blank owns your heart. And Christ is saying, if you see me and all of the infinite joy that I have to offer to you, you would sacrifice whatever that thing is that you think would make you happy for me. But you wouldn't do it begrudgingly. You would do it out of joy because you see that something is actually better. What is that thing? Because what we like to do in Christianity today, we're called to be the bride of Christ. And if I was standing up here with my wife and holding her hand in a covenant relationship with her, yet my left hand was over here with somebody else, trying to find satisfaction in other places outside of my covenant of marriage, how well do you think my marriage is going to go? Yet that is the exact same picture of the American church today, where we say that we hold hands with Christ on Sunday mornings, but Monday through Saturday, we're with our mistress. And we give Christ 1 hour, but she gets everything else. We're distracted. Our devotion falters. And Christ is saying, if you see me, and if you truly understand how much I can satisfy your heart and soul, you'll sacrifice everything for me out of joy. You'll let go of the sin that's in your heart that you keep hiding. You'll let go of the toil and struggle that you have for your job because you think that you're the center of the universe and you think you're the one providing for your family. And you say, no, God, I'm all in on you. You'll let go of whatever's on the side because you cannot fully embrace Christ, please hear me, without dropping something else. You can't fully embrace all that he has. This is the game. This is why we leave church. You leave church because you want both. You want both. You want Christ and you want whatever else you got on the side. And then you give up on Christ because you say back to Christ, you weren't working for me. You didn't do it for me. I prayed to you and you didn't answer. You were supposed to fix our marriage, but you didn't. You were supposed to fix our finances, but you didn't. And what Christ is saying is you were still holding on to something else that you thought could satisfy you. He says, if you want me, let go of that. Enjoy and embrace all that I have for you. See, it wasn't Christ who failed you. Our devotion to Christ failed us. This morning, my prayer is that you have sight, that you're satisfied in Christ, and that you would go all in on Christ and sacrifice whatever it is that you're holding on to on the side to embrace him for all that he is. Because here's the beauty of who he is. He will not fail you. Put it to the test. I dare you. Put it to the test. Whatever else you think will make you happy, it'll satisfy you for a moment, but Christ will never, ever, ever fail you. So church, do you have ears to hear this morning? Do you have eyes to see this morning? And do you have a heart that longs to believe that Jesus is in fact better? That's my prayer. That's my hope for you this morning.
Hey, thank you so much for tuning in to this week's message on the Wake Church YouTube channel. I pray that it was an encouragement to you and you were challenged to go deeper in your faith. If this message encouraged you, go ahead and share it with a friend and make sure to subscribe to this channel for more weekly content just like this and to be notified when we go live on Sunday mornings. Lastly, we want to thank you for your generosity. And if you'd like to support our mission, you can go to wakechurch.com/give or simply click the give button on the screen. Thanks again for tuning in. We love you.